Thanks so much for being here, Cass. Congratulations on your book.
Thank you so much.
Now, this isn't your first book. And before we get started, I want to read a little bit of your author profile here, your bio to the people. Cass R. Sunstein is the Robert Walmsley University professor at Harvard, where he is founder and director of the program on behavioral economics and public policy. He is the most cited law professor in the United States and probably the world. Star Wars. Why? How?
I have a little boy who's now 7 years old, and when he turned 5, a friend said you should show him Star Wars: A New Hope. My little boy loves baseball. The idea of lightsabers and droids and Darth Vader, that seemed like a ridiculous idea. But as a kind of favor to the friend, I showed it to him, and he got completely hooked, obsessed. And that makes him one of millions. And I thought, how did this series come about? How did George Lucas figure this out? Had he thought of it all at once, or did he act spontaneously and turn the plot in new directions he couldn't anticipate? And it turned out it's the latter. There's a lot of serendipity and new directions that he thought of spontaneously. And it occurred to me that's what our law is like, that's what our politics is like, that's what individual lives are like. And then I thought there's really something there, both in the genesis of Star Wars and in the plot of Star Wars, that makes it really the saga of our time. If you think of your life and where you are right now, there are twists and turns that are exactly like what George Lucas went through and that his characters go through.
Now, Star Wars is, I don't even think arguably, I think probably definitively the most successful movie of all time. One of the most successful movie franchises of all time. I think the most successful movie might be Titanic. But, as a franchise, I think you state in the book something about like $38 billion, something like that?
More like 30, but it'll get to 38 pretty soon.
Pretty soon. $30 billion. Now, equating behavioral science, public policy, economics to the sort of myth and the storylines of Star Wars, do you think that you're going towards Star Wars because it's success and that we often go to Star Wars because of how successful it is, and we can equate a lot of this analysis to storytelling in general a lot of the time?
Well, it has to be successful or famous for people who have a lot of things to think about it. There's an amazing TV show called Awake, from 2012, I think. You're looking blank, like you've never heard of that show. Awake. It's great. Maybe I have the name wrong even, but I think I have it right.
What is this show? Hold on.
It's a show about a guy whose life bifurcates. It's not clear whether he's alive with his son or he's alive with his wife. And they show you different plots of him with his son and him with his wife. And in one, his wife died, and the other, his son died. And you can't tell which he's dreaming and which is real. It's a fantastic show. It's a long way of saying that no one would write a book about Awake, but a lot of people are writing books about Star Wars, so it had to be famous first. But the fact that it got famous isn't a coincidence. It's that it connects with myths and religions of many different kinds, many different cultures, and then it gives us some kind of genius twists about redemption and parenthood and kids and freedom of choice, some really all-American twists. So it had to be well-known for it to have continuing interest, but things that are well-known often drop away if they aren't really good. This one's really good.
Well, I think I posed the question because, and I was talking to you about this in the green room, we know that George Lucas, his initial inspiration for Star Wars: A New Hope was the Flash Gordon serials of his childhood, which, while fun and grand, are not the most philosophical, ponderous stories. And A New Hope is in many ways him trying to replicate those serials of that time. And it's, in my opinion, that after the first one, the movies became then a bit deeper, a bit more interested in myth, in psychology, in the worlds that it could explore. So I guess the question is, did Star Wars contain all of those meanings, or does storytelling itself contain those questions a lot of the time?
It's a great question. So you're completely right that George Lucas was interested in Flash Gordon, which is fun and really shallow. Star Wars is fun and really shallow, but it also is quite deep. And the reason it got deep, I think, is that having not had the money to buy the rights to Flash Gordon, Lucas produced something else. He went through a zillion drafts. He worried himself pretty much to the bone. He hated writing a lot of the drafts. He threw away a lot of the drafts. But his own psychology is really interesting and complicated. He had a tortured relationship with his own dad that was reworked, I think, in the saga of Star Wars, and he's pretty much said that. All of us, whether we have tortured relationships with our father or not, have a sense, I think, that our dad is big and has a booming voice and is potentially scary. So the Darth Vader connection really gets into the human psyche. I think he had psychological insight that complicated Flash Gordon. I think it was actually true early on when A New Hope, you're right, it doesn't have the darkness of The Empire Strikes Back, but there is a farm boy who doesn't want to take on a big challenge, who meets a mysterious figure who tells him about his real father and makes his death seem both mysterious and tragic and possibly haunting. So A New Hope is giddy, and that's what makes it great, but it has stuff in it that is the stuff of myth. So I think Lucas, it's just there's something in his mind that went there. After Flash Gordon didn't work, he made something his own, and what he made his own is super shallow and really deep.
Now, you mentioned the farm boy who sort of gets indoctrinated, gets initiated into this rebel world. There's a brief moment of your book, I think the chapter is 13 different ways to look at Star Wars, right? And one of them is a way that I've actually always looked at Star Wars and sort of loved approaching it this way because I think it's a way that elicits a lot of empathy for what our culture in the United States refer to as the enemy a lot of times, which is, I think you call it jihadi Jedi, which is this idea of that the actual journey that Luke's character goes on in many ways can be sort of referenced to the journey that many young men in Middle Eastern countries go on when they join a jihadi fight, possibly in ISIS. And nobody wants to hear that and nobody wants to say those words, but it is that is the kind of story that actually exists. How much credence do you give to that sort of lens when it comes to viewing the movie?
None. But
I'm not saying we should sympathize with it.
It is one that you can make recognizable. I give it no credence, but I think it's interesting. There are lots of things like conspiracy theories that make no sense that are really interesting, even if in the end you give them no credence. So let's spell it out a little bit. There's this guy, a regular guy. He has no siblings. He's kind of lonely and lost. Then there's a religious figure in a cloak who talks to him about some order of Jedi. He wants to do acts that have a forbidden and maybe destructive feature. That is, you go inside the authority and you start blowing things up, or you try to blow up things, and you hide yourself, and you're a little like a terrorist. So on this view...
Luke is, in many ways, if you are the Empire, and if you support the Empire, which I don't, but if you were to, in that world, in the world of Star Wars, the Empire is in charge of everything, and if you support the Empire, then Luke would be viewed as a terrorist by you.
Completely, and so that's one way of thinking about it. Now, I think the way that's a little more general and a little more true to the tale is that Star Wars has a rebel's heart. So there's a kind of rebel yell, not the literal one, but some version of it, which you can hear at many moments. And that is in our culture. The American Revolution was a rebellion against an empire. And so the idea of taking an authority who, let's say, taxes without representation, or who stifles freedom, or who doesn't allow a republic to work, that's something in our culture, and the Boston Tea Party wasn't the most peaceful action in American history.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope no one misunderstood what I said. I was trying to give
not
any
a single
credence
person.
to.
Not
okay,
a single
great,
person.
great.
Misunderstood.
You mentioned Joseph Campbell briefly, and Lucas has talked about how, I think you even say in the book, Yoda was like his Joseph Campbell, or Joseph Campbell was his Yoda in terms of guiding him through telling these stories. For those in our audience who don't know much about Joseph Campbell, can you talk about him?
Well, what Campbell did was to say that many myths, countless myths, and religions have a single tale. He called it the monomyth. By the way, the book, A Hero with a Thousand Faces, had an editor you may have heard of, Jacqueline Kennedy. And as editor, she was triumphant in producing this volume from a pretty obscure professor, which for a time was a cultural touchstone. In some ways it still is, even if you haven't heard of Campbell. And what Campbell said is there's something in the human mind which resonates with a story of some young person, typically a man, but it could be a woman, who is challenged to leave home, who declines the challenge on the ground that it's too daunting, who ultimately embarks on an adventure, who meets an older mentor who has supernatural powers, or at least wisdom, who then encounters enemies and challenges and maybe is at grave risk, and then succeeds and something great happens, which might involve a kind of maturation, which involves a religious transfiguration and a homecoming. And what is amazing, I think, about Campbell's work is he is connecting a lot of religions and myths, but also if you think of the basic outlines of his tale, that's your tale. That's every human being's tale. And so it does connect. I have a 7-year-old boy. He hasn't left home yet, thank goodness. But notwithstanding the fact I've made him watch Star Wars like 1,000 times, he's still staying home. But it does resonate, the tale, with people of multiple ages. That's what Campbell got at. And this monomyth is both a big clue to the success of Star Wars and a big inspiration to Lucas's construction of the narrative. He gave it some fantastic twists of his own, but Campbell is his Yoda.
Well, one of the things that you say is, with Joseph Campbell, many people think that the different ways that we tell stories are culturally influenced, and it could be, but with Joseph Campbell, you say that it's in the mind, that to a certain degree, that myth is sort of, we're born with that myth already there. And I think the way that you talk about Joseph Campbell's stories, those are not just Star Wars, Spider-Man, big comic book superhero movies. Those are any stories that we see for the most part. That is the storytelling device all around. That's the first, second, third act structure that you just told me.
So many stories. Of course, the superhero movies have this dynamic: Batman, Superman, my current favorite, Jessica Jones. Fantastic. Season 2 is going to be unbelievable, I bet. It's going to be, I really hope and believe, and it's going to be unbelievable. That's basically the superhero structure. But if you look at a tale of any of our iconic figures, Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, take the ones you like and put to one side the ones you don't like so much. Donald Trump, the outlines of their tale have a hero's journey feature. And what I think Lucas was alert to, George Lucas, the creator, was that this just resonates with our minds. It's not that we have to imbibe it by reading a text. So Campbell himself said, all the gods and goddesses, all the devils, they're all within you. And it is true that even if you don't read a whole lot or watch a whole lot, you can instantly recognize the story of someone who is choosing between good and evil, who makes a decision at some point to leave home and embark on some adventure, who once doing that is a little rootless and scared. That's everybody. That's in our heads. That's the stuff of children's nightmares and beautiful dreams. So that's what Star Wars gets at.
You also just said choosing between good and evil, and you counter one of the sort of, I would say, famous or very well-recognized understandings of Star Wars, which is that it's about destiny, sort of preordained fate by gods of some kind. Many people think that's what the Jedi is, and you say absolutely not. The movies are about freedom of choice, human freedom.
Completely. So the narrative is obviously influenced by that strand of culture which says that there's a prophecy, that destiny is ordaining our path, but the Star Wars saga comes out exactly on the other side. So difficult to see the future is, says Yoda. everything is happening as I have foreseen, the Emperor says. Guess who's right? Yoda's right. So in the prequels, the unfairly maligned prequels, Anakin is...
Fairly maligned?
Oh, yeah, they're underrated.
Bold statement.
Their time will come. Anakin Skywalker, who goes to the dark side, he's confronted with choices that are exactly the same as the choices that Luke faces in Return of the Jedi. They're almost physically the same scenes, and Anakin chooses always the dark side. The Sith respect freedom of choice. They are not going to force anyone to go to the dark side. You have to choose on your own to go to the dark side. Anakin does because he can't bear to see his beloved perish. And Luke almost goes to the dark side because he can't bear to see his sister threatened. I think brilliantly, in the end, Luke is saved by his dad, Anakin Darth Vader, by the free choice of Anakin Darth Vader. And the reason Anakin, we'll call him for this purpose, saves his son is attachment. He rejects destiny because of, let's use the word, love. The same thing that draws him to the dark side, which is the unbearable quality of losing someone he loves, is what takes him to the lightest of the light, because he can't stand to see his beloved's child die. That's actually very moving, and it suggests that the rebel heart of Star Wars is with, even if you're the worst person in the world, which Darth Vader basically is, you can save your soul at the end by making the right choice. I think that's a deeply American theme. It connects with our commitment to freedom of choice. It's also a Christian theme, and it's not what Joseph Campbell is talking about.
Now, I want to ask you, excuse me, spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen Force Awakens, maybe close your ears or walk out of the room. When it comes to The Force Awakens and we have the sort of rearrangement of the father figure in regards to, rather than having this sort of overbearing, dark, angry father like we had with Darth Vader, and we have Harrison Ford as the father of the angry, angsty, teenager who has now become a kind of Vader. What do you think that says culturally about where we are now with fathers, or was that just kind of like a cynical flip to be able to tell the story?
I think it's ingenious, and in a way, one of the very few routes that would make continuation of the story completely work. So the Star Wars tale, which is, I think, more familiar kind of in the human mind, is that your father scares you. He's big, he has a booming voice, sometimes gets mad, and that is, recognizable. The idea of the scary teenager, that could be silly, or it could be what James Dean has a black mask rather than a knife, or some character, some current TV show becomes a dark side villain. That's much harder to do. I think they succeeded in pulling it off, that is the authors of The Force Awakens, and it has a kind of symmetry where, not to spoil the plot, so those of you who are listening, block your ears for a moment, but only for a moment. The idea that Darth Vader's grandchild is a Darth Vader wannabe, that resonates. The idea that the great villains of history can have a magnetic pull, especially to their biological descendants, that is recognizable. So I think it wasn't desperate, it was a really good choice.
Absolutely. Let's open up to the audience for questions. First question.
Hey, Cass. The book seems fascinating. Currently, who would you consider this country's Obi-Wan Kenobi?
Well, I'm biased. I worked for the President of the United States, and he's a pretty wise guy. Not in the sense of a wise Alec, a person who has wisdom.
Obama. Next question.
Hey, guys, over here. I feel like I could talk Star Wars all day, but I'll keep it short. So, with the new films coming out, especially with Rogue One, why do you feel that these films still resonate with people?
I think there are two reasons. One is we don't have many cultural touchstones that connect us to people who live in various different places, or to people who are a lot older and a lot younger. So while I was writing the book, I just happened to be talking in this past December to a high-level Russian official. And the relations between the U.S. and Russia have not been that great over the last year, a lot of tension. And we were having a cordial but kind of stiff conversation, and then I mentioned, kind of as a conversational, desperate moment, I'm writing a book about Star Wars. And his face completely softened. And this is a person, not a young person. He looked like a 12-year-old boy all of a sudden. And he said, "Oh, in my country, we love Star Wars." So the idea of something that unifies us across different countries, different types, I think people really crave that. And the notion that we can connect across generations, that's also something that that people love. We have a pretty fragmented society. Star Wars, it's a little like July 4th, except it's not that old. And that quite helps. Also, it's good. It has a kind of both a quality to it, the best ones, and it has a kind of energy. So Lawrence Kasdan, who co-wrote some of them, said about the best ones, they move like a son of a bitch. And that, he nailed it.
That's true. The Force Awakens, I think my favorite part about it was just how fast and efficiently it moved. It's really difficult to do that and tell a story like that, especially one where you feel like you probably have to have so much exposition letting you know what this new world is and how it connects to the old one. They did a great job.
Agreed.
Next question.
Hey, I know a lot of fans are passionate about the idea that Han shot first. So I was wondering where you fall on the issue.
I feel so passionate about it. I mean, I feel passionate about a lot of things, about the United States of America, about goodness, about fairness, and the fourth on my list of the four things I care most about, Han shot first.
I agree.
Hi, Cass. We're going to take our last question from an online viewer. So Jack would like to know, do you use any of these themes in your teaching or classes?
I did one class at Harvard Law School on the question of serendipity, meaning things in life go in directions you couldn't necessarily anticipate, and that's true of our law. The idea that states have to recognize same-sex marriage now, who would have expected that? The idea in 1930 that we would abandon, as a matter of constitutional principle, racial segregation, that was not anticipatable. Now it seems obvious. So I talked about serendipity and accident and surprise in a course, and let's just say Star Wars did come up.
Cass, I have to let you go. The book is on shelves now?
It's on shelves now, but it's going fast.
So get out there and pick up a copy of The World According to Star Wars. Cass, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.